This episode is brought to you by Our Daily Bread Ministries, a global media organization that makes the life-changing wisdom of the Bible understandable and accessible to all. Visit whereyou'refrom.org for more information. That's whereyafrom.org.
Welcome back to the Grace Enough podcast. I am your host, Amber Cullum. And in today's episode, I sit down with Scot McKnight and Laura Barringer. Together, they have written a book that I believe every Christian should read, particularly pastors. Not only should you read it, but you should apply it to your ministry. The book is A Church Called Tov, Forming a Goodness Culture that Resists Abuses of Power and Promotes Healing. And that is exactly what we talk about today. You will hear Laura share a bit about her experience attending Willow Creek Church. You will also hear early warning signs of a toxic church culture and why a goodness culture is vital. And then towards the end, Scot unpacks a bit of the way the Western business model has negatively impacted the church. Listen to this snippet of what he shares.
When I compare the biblical passages about pastors and shepherds to job descriptions in churches, I think there is a huge disconnect, is that these pastors in these mega churches many times are not pastoring people. They're running a business. They're showing up on Sunday. They're running an organization. They're entrepreneurs. And this has changed church cultures more than anything else in the 20th century and 21st century.
As you listen to today's conversation, maybe a friend or loved one you know is in ministry or is planning to go into ministry, or maybe it's someone who has been abused by someone in the church. Will you share this episode with them along with the book? It is a much needed conversation and shift that must begin with us. Hello, Scot and Laura. Welcome to the Grace Enough podcast.
Well, good to be with you.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. It's great to have both of you here. I don't very often get to interview two people at once, and so that's really fun. And we'll get started by just having you guys kind of introduce yourself to our listeners, tell everybody what your connection is so everyone knows. And either one of you can go first, whoever wants to start.
Okay, I am Scot McKnight, and I am a professor of New Testament at Northern Seminary in Lisle, Illinois, near, sort of western suburbs of Chicago. And I've been teaching almost 40 years, New Testament, in seminaries and undergraduate school. So married, my wife and I grew up together in a small town west of Chicago, way out in western Illinois, Freeport. And I'm an author and a professor, etc. I do preaching. I'm ordained. So
that's a little bit about you, right? Just to scratch the surface, I'm sure. So Laura, what about you?
I don't have all of those qualifications.
Me neither. So you're in good company.
I am a teacher. I've been teaching primary school for more than 20 years. I can't believe that. I've worked with first graders, second graders. This year I'm teaching kindergartners.
All right.
My story in landing here is an unlikely one.
Well, let's jump into what we're here to talk about today. And we'll talk a little bit about the book, obviously, as we go along. But first of all, your family attended Willow Creek Church for a number of years. And so what were some of the strengths and some of the weaknesses of serving and attending a church that's just so large and so well known?
Well, I would say I don't really want to start with a weakness, but I guess I will because it turns into a strength. We started attending Willow Creek. I'm trying to think. I believe I started attending in the year 2000. And because it is such a large church, it can be very difficult to get plugged into community there. So I would say you really have to be, I'm fairly outgoing. So, I eventually made friends and it was fine, but it can be a struggle. It can be hard and intimidating to walk into a room of 1,000 or more people and not know anybody. But one of the strengths that, and probably still some of our most memorable times, and we look back with fondness, are the years of our section community, when they really made an effort to make big church small and divided the auditorium up into sections. And it actually reminds me a bit of the church we attend now, where it just felt like a smaller community where everybody knew each other through the section.
Yeah.
A couple things that were impressive to me about Willow. We attended for 10 years. We were never members. Laura and Mark were more involved than we ever were. But we lived, it was a 45-minute drive on the weeknights to get there. Amazing amount of evangelism that led to baptisms. And this is all good.
Yeah.
You know, for all that's happened in the meantime, I will never discount the fantastic sermons that we heard at Willow Creek. Bill Hybels, John Ortberg, Nancy Beach, and then they had visiting people. Those were very good. I always felt that Willow Creek wanted to do church, all of church, not just mega church stuff. You know, it's often called the attractional model. Well, we get everybody to come on Sunday, but the rest of the week, everybody's living somewhere else. I always felt that they tried to work at that. I don't think they did. And I think they surrendered a strong sense of discipleship. It just seemed impossible. That's what I believe. Now, the other side to me is they didn't have the strength theologically in an infrastructure and in leadership among the elders and deacons, whatever you want to call them. They called them elders, but they had other names too, to be able to discern and resist what occurred. It just wasn't there. And that was a culture that allowed, that permitted, that propped up, that sustained, retained Bill Hybels with his dysfunctional powers.
Yes.
And behaviors. And as I look at it now, I think this was one of the biggest mistakes that Willow Creek made. And I am aware that there were people who fought it, but the system was too strong. You know, what's the language from Star Trek? The Borg. You can't stop the Borg.
Yeah, that's something that I cannot relate to, only because I'm not a Star Trek person, but I can.
The Borg is irresistible, I think is the language. Yeah.
But I mean, I do understand a little bit of the mega church culture. And it's interesting, as I was reading the book, which is called A Church Called Tov, I remember, because I went to Southland Christian Church in Kentucky. And so when Mike Bro left to go to Willow Creek, we were just crushed, right? And but also excited for him. And that it's just very interesting as I read through and realized, like, wow, you know, he really went through a lot when he showed up at Willow Creek. And so, yeah, that's a conversation for a whole different podcast. But you guys have written this book together, and it's really about forming a goodness culture that resists abuses of power and promotes healing. And so, Laura, will you share a little bit of the backstory that led to the writing of this book?
Sure. I mean, like I said, it's unlikely for me to be sitting here because I'm a primary grades teacher. And how I got involved in this topic is, you know, like I said, an unlikely path. So we went right away when the Tribune story broke, this story about Willow Creek and allegations against Bill Hybels. We were drawn to it immediately because we had left Willow Creek by that time. We hadn't been gone for that long. We left before the scandal, but we were maybe a year out of having left. And we still have very good friends that attend Willow. And so we saw the headline and we're kind of in disbelief, didn't really believe it at first. And then we started reading the article, and that's really when everything changed for us, because we knew the names of the women.
Yeah.
And by we, I mean my husband and me. He knew one of them quite well, Vonda Dyer. And we just knew them to be people. They're credible. They're not people that are going to make up a story to take down Bill Hybels the way that he was saying they were.
Yeah.
And so that really is what engaged us, is knowing who they were and feeling like they were, as time went on and as weeks went on, they were getting, for lack of a better word, they were getting pounded by the church. Their character was being attacked, and nobody was standing up for them. And starting that first night, my dad believed them. He told us it was very likely that the story was true. And so I really just pushed him. He would teach us about how they were misusing scripture. And, now I understand that was spiritual abuse. And my husband and I felt like we were learning so much from him that we felt like we're benefiting from this. But I really thought, from what I was hearing based on conversations I was having with people, how they were following the church and the anger that was being heaped on the women and the truth tellers, I felt like everybody needs to hear from a theologian, because things need to be set straight. This can't be how the story ends.
Yeah. Well, and Scott, so what was it like? She comes to you and she says this, what's going on. Give a little bit of your side of that experience.
I think we actually sent the Chicago Tribune article to Laura and Mark that evening. So we read it. I read it. I was 3 paragraphs in or so, and I said to my wife, Willow's in big trouble. Yeah. Bill Hybels, this is going down. And so I was reading and paying attention, and Laura would ask me questions, and she would tell me the stuff that she was hearing from the Willow side. Of course, I'm not hearing it. People at Willow aren't consulting me. I'm not a part of the church. We had been gone for 5 or 6 years. And I started to, just think my way through it. And it just, because of conversations with Laura and Mark and my wife, Chris, and so many people writing me and asking me, I was in an airport and sat down and wrote out my thoughts. And I sent it to Laura and Mark and Chris, and everybody read it and made suggestions and edits. And it just sat there. And I think I wrote this thing in April.
Wow.
And then we were gone in June. I took students to Israel, to Turkey, Greece, and Italy on a tour of New Testament sites. And when I got back, I called Laura and asked her, I said, what's going on with Willow? And she said nothing. And I just sort of said right then that I'm going to do something, because these women are telling the truth. Yeah. I was thoroughly convinced that the women were telling the truth and that their side needed support. So I blogged about it. And Amber, I'm telling you, it was one of those blog posts, that you're sort of made for.
Yep.
And my voice, even though I wasn't at Willow, I had quite a bit of respect at Willow because I taught there quite a bit. And they listened to me. Some people were mad at me. They thought I was too strong. But even people who thought I was too firm have come to me and said, you weren't. It was just painful to hear the truth.
Yeah.
And because it wasn't harsh at all. It was, let's say what happened.
Right.
And so I started writing, and then I think I wrote 2 or 3 more blog posts over the summer. And that led to Laura pushing me, and I actually had a conversation with a publisher who wanted me to write the story of Willow Creek, and I said I wouldn't do that. But Laura kept pushing, and I like to read about Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Germany. Yeah. I've done a lot of work in German. And so I was reading a book about the pastors during the Holocaust and afterwards, in Germany, after the war. And I literally was astounded at the parallels.
Wow.
Between the things they did and the things Willow did and the things I was hearing about other churches, Harvest, the Catholic Church, the Southern Baptist, C.J. Mahaney, just name them. When people are confronted with their sins that are shocking and will destroy their ministry, they do certain patterns. And this is what I learned. So I started taking notes, and we were on vacation, And Laura and Mark didn't know this. I said, I got some ideas. And it became the chapter. It became the chapter called False Narratives.
Yes.
That's where the book began.
Okay.
And then we constructed stuff around it. But Amber, it was really important to me. And I got a letter yesterday and today from what I would call super insiders at Willow Creek who have thanked me for the book.
Yeah.
I didn't want to write an expose. I wanted it to be redemptive.
Right.
And I found that this word tov, goodness and good, worked wherever I spoke about it. And I was beginning to teach my classes about tov. So I wanted to work out the major characteristics of tov, because I thought what Willow, what Harvest, what these churches lack is goodness and tov. So what are the characteristics of tov, and what are the things that are the opposite of tov, the moral characteristics? And that's what we worked on. So
yeah, and it is a book that, I mean, I have honestly recommended it already probably 15 or 20 times. I sent it immediately to my pastor and said, I feel like every pastor should read this book. So I'm sending it on to you. And with all the stuff going on with Ravi Zacharias and people commenting and me saying, a great book that you should look into is this one. And so I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for both of your voices. And so I want to share a quote from the book. It says, "We form church cultures, but we are simultaneously formed by the cultures we've helped form." So in relation to the church, Scott, kind of unpack that a little bit for us.
Now this is critical, Amber, and this is critical for churches because this is general truth. Never underestimate the power of the environment you work in to gradually transform who you are. That's a split infinitive, but it's David Brooks.
Yeah.
When you choose to work at a certain company, let's say when you choose to work at a church, you are turning yourself into the sort of person who works in that church. Moreover, living in a pragmatic utilitarian manner turns you into a utilitarian pragmatist. And there's more truth in there about church life than many people care to admit. The point he's making is that the culture of a place you work, your company, the culture of a church makes you the sort of person who works there. If you don't, and who works there comfortably, if you aren't comfortable, they get rid of you. Right?
True.
This
Yes,
is how
absolutely.
companies and big churches work, and little churches. So it has to do with the fact that churches aren't simply volunteer societies where anybody can come and give their free opinions and they're all accepted. That's not how it works. Churches become cultures. They become a society that begins to shape people to be like that society, that culture. This is what we think is one of the most important factors. And I said this over and over to Laura and Mark before anything was ever thought about writing a book, is that this is about culture and this is about character. And good characters produce good cultures, and bad toxic characters produce toxic cultures. And look, we all know stories of toxic cultures. And it's not like we're idealists who think churches have to be perfect. Every church is broken.
That's right.
Every church has its problems. It has toxicities. But it's when pastors and leaders who are to be the best Christians in the church at some level, it's when they are toxic and creating toxicities in the church that it really gets nasty.
Well, what would you guys say are a few of the first really early warning signs for people that you're in a toxic church culture? Because it's so easy to overlook it, particularly when you're in, oh goodness, one of these big churches where, I mean, everything's fancy and we get drawn in so easy by the wooing of the teaching and all of that.
That's an interesting question because people have asked me that about Willow Creek. And I suppose there were things that should have been red flags to me at the time that I didn't pick up on or didn't become part of my conscious thinking. But for me, it took leaving Willow Creek and experiencing a totally different culture, which our church feels like it's as much of Tov as a church as I've ever attended, and experiencing a different culture to be able to see the toxicity at Willow Creek. I think it's really hard. Maybe now, because I've had experiences and I've done so much research and reading, maybe now I could walk in and see it, but I didn't. I did not. And we attended Willow Creek for almost 2 decades.
Wow. I would say, Amber, what would bring a big alert to me is a celebrity. If the pastor is a celebrity, and if there is constant talk about loyalty and that we're the best church in the world, or, just constantly bragging about the church, I am going to be very, very suspicious. I also would say a warning sign. Toxicity is narcissism, and fear and power are the characteristics of these toxic churches, but they're not always easy to see. And you got to get behind the curtain to see these things. But if I'm at a church and I see a celebrity, I'm going to start asking questions.
Okay.
If I see loyalty and constant building up and bragging about the church and the pastor and the musicians, whatever it is, I'm going to be suspicious because they're holding people up at a level that is going to detract from Christ, and they are magnifying the wrong thing.
Absolutely.
And that is to me, those are some warning signs that some bad things are going on.
Right.
And I think people need to know too, what does an anti-celebrity look like? I know what it is now. We go to church at Church of the Redeemer. It's a little Anglican community, and our pastor Jay is not treated any more important than anybody else at the church. Sure, he speaks and he's up in front, but after the service is over, he mingles with the rest of us. He's not too important to come in the room with the rest of us, and he knows our names.
Yeah.
He'll walk up to you and, "Hi, Laura, how was your week?" I mean, I remember being astounded by it. I thought, the pastor knows my name. Like, I never even had that expectation at Willow Creek, because you can't get close to Bill Hybels, nor did I never tried to. Meaning, like, like you can't even get.
Yes, you don't just walk up front, right?
Yeah, like you're stopped by security and all this. So, yeah, I agree with my dad that would be a huge red flag for me anymore. Is, can you get to the pastor? Does he know your name? Is he too important to spend time with you?
Well, and I have to say, you guys wrote about that a little bit when it came to the chapter where you were just talking about the pastors. They need to be serving too. Like, is your pastor serving his people, not just by teaching on a stage, but also in other capacities? And so that was really something good for me to consider. But something that I have witnessed personally, and I know other people who have witnessed personally, is the misapplication of Matthew 18, which you guys write about in chapter 3 of the book. And so how is Matthew 18 misapplied when it comes to this, abuse of power in church culture? What have you guys witnessed when it comes to that?
This one really bothered me. This is one of the issues that I went to my dad about, and I said, "What is going on? This does not feel right." And he was able to explain it to us. But Willow Creek was saying, and I'm not trying to pick on Willow Creek, but it's
your personal experience.
Right. This is where it all started for us. They would say that they believe in following Matthew 18, thereby implying that the women going public were not following Matthew 18. And so I was starting to hear, it never settled well with me, but I'm a lay person. I'm not, qualified to interpret Matthew 18. I just knew that it didn't feel right. And it also was really bothering me is I would have friends from Willow Creek say, they're not following Matthew 18. You were just seeing it the leader, the elders would say it.
Yep.
The pastors would say it, and they would believe, which of course you should be able to believe, your elders and pastors, and they would follow it and repeat it and live it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've lived it too.
And that's what I was
experienced this 2 or 3 witnesses thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's when my dad, explained that they weren't even using it correctly, and I encouraged him to write about it.
Yes. Tell us, Scott.
The fundamental principle of Matthew 18 is if you have something against a brother or sister, that's an added word. The Greek is just simply brother. You go and make it right with them. That's what Matthew 18:15 says. If your brother sins, go and point out their fault, etc. If they listen to you, you've won them. But if they will not listen, if they refuse to listen. So the point is a sort of a one-on-one thing. Now, they were applying this to Bill Hybels and the women who were making allegations against him. I've heard this with many pastors use this text with accusations made against them. All right. If John Ortberg and Bill Hybels have a falling out, they should deal with it. They probably should be able to deal with it one-on-one. But when you're dealing with a pastor and a sexual allegation that now brings in power play, you have to ask, is this the right text to be using here? And then you have to ask, is this what this is about? Well, I understand why Willow said, that the women should go to Bill Hybels. And how far is that going to go when you start asking that question? It's going to stop.
Can I also interrupt for 1 second? They did go to him. 2 of them did, one-on-one. Right. So for Willow to say they weren't following it wasn't even true.
Wow.
I pointed this text out to people. There's a text in Deuteronomy that actually deals with this very issue of a man and a woman and allegations. And it doesn't require 2 or 3 witnesses. All right, now, this is the other side to it. They also, at Willow Creek, appealed to 1 Timothy 5:19. You can't make an accusation against an elder, a leader in a church, unless there's 2 or 3 witnesses. And, well, at this point, women are saying, okay, I am absolutely scared to death to go talk to Bill Hybels, and it's not going to go anywhere. And I tried it, and it didn't go anywhere. The second thing is, it was just me and Bill Hybels. It was just me and,
That's
whoever.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So now there's not 2 or 3 witnesses. So you have to ask, is this the appropriate text to be using here? Because it is almost never the case that when a man is the perpetrator against a female, and it's a pastor who has power over this person and has power of a platform to humiliate this person and, to render damage in libel and everything else by accusing the woman of other things. But how often does a pastor abuse a woman in front of someone else? I mean, I think the chances are 0. Yes. So that text cannot be worked for this one. And I'm writing a commentary right now on 1 Timothy. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Most scholars would say that text is about financial abuse by leaders in the church. And this seems to be what's going on, or teaching abuse. And so you don't just start going public about this stuff. You got to try to go with you got to get a couple people and talk to the leader about it. So I just felt like it was a misuse of a text that would re-victimize women and lead to humiliation and shame. Diane Langberg says that before a woman can confront their abuser, they have to be a long way down on the healing process. They just can't, they don't have the strength to handle it. And so churches abuse that by manipulating the woman into a situation of silence. They all of a sudden are going to declare the woman has retracted or something like this.
That's so
Most
true.
of the time, these are lies. So I know that's a longer explanation than I planned on giving. But
No, but I mean, it is so true that when you're in a situation like that and you do have the power over someone, how easy it is to just sweep it under the rug. Again, we're seeing it right now. I've heard so many people say
yeah,
in this Ravi situation, why would someone wait until he died? And I'm like, why don't you read some books from people who are abuse survivors?
that's
And
right.
you will hear a lot of the reasons. But until you've walked a mile in someone else's shoes, be very,
That's
very
right.
careful to not believe their accusations.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I
we're
know,
following the Ravi story closely.
yes. And I mean, I know with Mary DeMuth that you're friends with her as well. And,
Yeah.
I mean, she's been on the show and her story's incredible. And she's
Yeah.
such a great voice for people to try to understand more of a different perspective.
That's right. That's right.
And it's sad that we even have to have these conversations, but it's the
Yeah.
realities. So, like I said, the book has the word Tov in it, and you've talked about that a little bit, but I want to make sure the listener understands what is Tov and how is it more than a works-based goodness?
Tov is a master term of the Old Testament, and it is also a frequent term in the New Testament. Goodness is a fruit of the Spirit. It is also it is a term used a lot in Judaism, but it is a term that makes Christians scared. We appeal all the time that there is none good, no, not one.
Yeah.
So if I were to say to my students, your goal is to become good, there's a Protestant instinct that that's impossible and wrong to try to do. Okay, I want to say they have a good instinct here, but it's wrong not to desire to be good. This is a master term in the Old Testament that describes God. God alone is Tov. It describes the design of God. You open up page 1 of your Bible and everything is Tov. In fact, when God's all done, he says it's Tov Ma'od. It is very good.
That's right.
Then Tov is active. In other words, it is something that people do. And it is something God designed human beings to be like God, God-like, to be Christ-like. Yeah. Christ is Tov. So we are called to be good. Now, the key thing in the New Testament is that we are not Tov on the basis of effort. It is not something that we create ourselves. The Holy Spirit is at work in us through God's grace and transforming powers of God's grace and the Spirit, so that over time, someone who follows Jesus and spends time in the presence of God, the Spirit, and the Son will become Tover than they were before.
That's right. Okay? We hope.
Yes. And so Tov is a master category of the Bible for the moral and let's say the character of those who are connected to Jesus. If you are connected to Jesus, you are connected to someone who is altogether Tov. And if you spend time in the presence of someone who's altogether Tov, you'll be Tover. And our illustration, one of the things Laura would write me, I found a great illustration of a church that's Tov, or I found an illustration of someone who's Tov. I said, no, they got to be dead. We're not going to use any stories of people who are alive, because we may find out that the people that we think are Tov are actually not Tov. But so we use Mr. Rogers.
Yeah.
And one of the amazing things about Mr. Rogers, I've read 2 or 3 books about him, is that people who worked with him and for him all said he was good. They often use this word good. And they were good when they were around him.
Yeah. Wow.
That is what it's all about, is we want to be with Jesus. And when we're with Jesus, he'll give us that sense of, I shouldn't do this now because that's not Tov. Whether we're using the word Tov or not is not the point. Although I do think it's a mighty good word, and it's catchy.
It is catchy. And I mean, I think we need to become a little bit more comfortable about speaking about virtues. We've allowed even our Christian culture a little bit to hijack virtues, like, oh, we shouldn't do those things. But I'm like, Christ-like character means that you become Tover.
Yeah.
So I like it.
With
I'm
a
sticking
Southern
with you
accent.
guys. That's right.
I like it. I like it.
I know. Once you mix Kentucky, Florida, there's no accent, and North Carolina together, it gets really bad. It's really bad. Okay. Well, so the second half of the book is all geared towards how to create this Tov type of culture in your church. And so the portion of that really, really struck me was how the Western business model has really taken root in churches. And I was reading that and thinking through every church I have been a part of and just thought, oh my goodness, this is so true. We think in numbers, we think in achievement, and we've really struggled to not make that the priority instead of Christ-likeness. And so as you guys were researching that and writing about that, what did you really discover?
Well, my dad has like a big picture observation of it.
Mm-hmm.
I experienced it at Willow Creek because, again, I'm not trying to pick on Willow Creek, but this is my experience and what led to the book. Is I kind of got caught up in it, being involved in section leadership, and we would go to these training sessions led by Bill Hybels, and he called it fill, like he wanted your section to fill. And it was all about inviting people in and making sure that the seats had bodies in them. Wow. And we also, every year we attended this big event called the Leadership Summit. My husband used to be the general manager for it. And we would all learn about leadership, what it felt like at Willow. And I said that maybe actually I did see something when I was at Willow Creek, because it often felt to me like the only spiritual gift that matters at Willow Creek is leadership. You never heard about encouragement or hospitality, or it was like it didn't even matter. That's how it felt. I don't have the gift of leadership. And so I always felt like, well, okay, this isn't for me, or, and that did bother me. And so my dad, now you can talk bigger picture about how this came to be in the church.
Yeah.
I am not opposed to megachurches. I'm wary of megachurches, and I think that that people involved in the inner circle of megachurches have temptations that people in smaller churches just don't have. Money, power, getting rid of people, etc. Okay, I'm not going to just rail on megachurches, but something happened in the United States in the 1970s and 80s. And I think Jerry Falwell, the original Jerry Falwell, was a big part of it, because his big church became a prominent church because it was on TV all the time. And then this was the beginning. Now, Dallas, Criswell, First Baptist Church, Dallas, Texas, with W.A. Criswell, was big, and nobody talked about it being that big. But Falwell kind of showed on TV a model. And then all of a sudden, with the church growth movement and a change in culture and a change in attitude, there was an explosion of mega churches that started in the 80s. What I noticed is that there was a radical shift also in what was considered the primary gifts of these people. They weren't theologians. They weren't Bible experts by and large. They were leaders. And this is something that Eugene Peterson griped about endlessly, almost like an old curmudgeon. And even in his book, when he's talking about the pastor, a memoir of his life, he gripes about the leadership and business models. And increasingly, churches, because they were getting so big and there was so much money involved, and buildings, they were beginning to adopt business models. All right, churches have to conduct themselves in honorable ways with business and responsible ways. So there's a business side to it. But when the pastor becomes a leader, the leader is not a pastor. And I use this word cloud as an illustration. Yeah. I paid attention to word clouds. And I know people who are headhunters for pastors. I know these people. And one of them wrote me and said, I'm embarrassed about what we're doing. And he was going to make some changes. But when I compare the biblical passages about pastors and shepherds to job descriptions in churches, I think there is a huge disconnect, is that these pastors in these mega churches many times are not pastoring people. They're running a business. They're showing up on Sunday. They're running an organization. They're entrepreneurs, and they study business models, and they're not reading the Bible. They're not reading theology. I have to tell them what the new perspective is because they've never heard of it.
Wow.
They don't even read Christianity Today. They don't have time for that. They're reading other things and consumed with other things. And this has changed church cultures more than anything else in the 20th century and 21st century. Churches are no longer hospitals for sinners that nurture people into Christlikeness. They are entertainment centers that attract people and build numbers. A friend of ours, Steve Carter, says it's about butts in seats, bills in plates, and baptisms on the whatever. 3 B's of mega churches. And none of those are measuring character. They're not measuring Tov. They're not measuring Christlikeness. And that is the reason for the weakness of the church in the United States.
It's so discouraging, but that's the thing. There are churches that are smaller that aren't that way. And so that's
I agree.
That's the hope that we, cling to, right? But
Amber, I was going to tell you, I think it's 80% of churches in the United States are 75 and under.
Really?
And I teach a lot of these. I teach pastors in churches like this, and I speak and I talk to people like this. And I find almost all of them just good old people who do the right thing and teach the Bible, and they're not particularly charismatic, but they're as faithful as can be, and they serve the Lord. They love their family. They're good people. They're
That's
Tov.
right.
There's 100,000, no, I don't know, 10,000 Tov pastors in the United States, and you don't know any of their names.
That's right. Well, and so as we begin to close, let's just say that somebody is listening and they're thinking, oh my goodness, this may be my church. I am seeing something now that I have not seen before, or maybe they have seen it and just this kind of confirmed it. What is some encouragement that you would give to that parishioner who's thinking, oh, what do I do next?
Well, Laura and I have talked about this, and we know we have a project ahead of us to talk about this. I would say they need to find someone safe and secure to talk to. Okay, maybe even a therapist, but someone with some theological moxie. Okay, and then the thing that Laura and I talk about is they need to form a pocket of Tov. They need to find a couple other people, maybe a small group, where they can practice Tov and not allow these toxic things to begin to influence them. And then hope that there's other people who catch that vision and begin to spread it out. Amber, I was teaching a class, and in the class was a student who had a PhD in organizational transformation. And after I presented my stuff on Tov and all my glorious works, he says to me, well, he says, you've got some pretty good terms. He said, you're not using the right terms for organizational transformation. But he said, here's what we teach. It takes 7 years to transform an organization. So it's not going to be a series of sermons.
Yeah.
It's going to be from the ground up, bottom up transformation, not top down. People at the bottom have got to be Tov. And as they become Tov, they will not permit toxicity to grow and become fertile in their church.
That's powerful. Laura, anything to add to that? Or you?
No, I mean, that says it all. I just have one word: resist.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, guys, I am so grateful for you writing this. I will continue to share the book. And I know the two of you, haven't you partnered on, did you all partner on the Jesus Creed together or just on the children's book? Share that so our listeners know. Scott, I know you've written all kinds of books, but.
Yeah. No, Laura didn't help me with Jesus Creed, but she wrote a little book for children.
Okay.
The Jesus Creed for Children.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. And I haven't read that one yet. I'm going to have to get that because I have perfect age children for that. So
it's about teaching them to love God and love other people, but written for a child.
Right. Well, guys, thanks so much for your time and again for this book.
Well, thank you, Amber.
Thank you for having us. It was nice to be with you.
Well, I hope this conversation has you thinking about ways you can begin cultivating a goodness culture in your home and church. I would love to hear what resonated with you or who you decided to send the episode to. Email me at graceenoughpodcast@gmail.com or on Instagram at graceenoughpodcast_Amber. I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you for listening to the Grace Enough Podcast. Tune in next time.